The Montana plains stretched endless beneath a crimson sunset when rancher Thomas Reed spotted a figure stumbling through the tall grass. At first, he thought it was a wounded animal, something lost to the cold, but as he rode closer, he saw her. A young native woman, barefoot, her skin pale from exhaustion, her body trembling. She looked like she had been running for miles. He dismounted, heart pounding, and caught her just as she collapsed into the dust. "You're safe now," he murmured, wrapping his coat around her. She didn't speak, only shivered, clutching the fabric as though it were life itself. He carried her to his cabin, the heavy snow starting to fall in white curtains outside. The door creaked shut behind him, the fire crackling to life in the hearth. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, dark, frightened but alive. "You're all right?" Thomas said softly, setting a tin cup of water beside her. She reached for it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse and thin. When he asked her name, she hesitated, then said, "Ayanna." He didn't press her for more. Some names he knew carried pain with them. Hours passed before she spoke again. "They wanted to marry me," she said quietly, staring at the fire. "To a man old enough to be my grandfather. I ran. They said I dishonored them." Her words cracked, heavy with shame and fear. Thomas listened in silence. He had seen hardship before, famine, war, loss, but something about her voice stirred something long buried inside him. He placed another log on the fire, watching the sparks rise like tiny stars. "You did what you had to do," he said. "No one should live without choice." That night, she slept by the fire, her head resting against his old wool blanket. Thomas stayed awake, sitting by the window with his rifle laid across his knees, listening to the wind howl against the cabin walls. Every sound made his heart tense. He didn't know who might come looking for her, or what danger might follow. But one thing he did know, he wouldn't let anyone hurt her again. He stared at the dancing flames, feeling a strange warmth he hadn't known in years. For the first time since his wife died, the cabin didn't feel so empty. In the early hours, when the storm had swallowed the valley, Thomas drifted into a light sleep. He dreamed of the prairie, endless, wild and free, and of a woman standing barefoot in the snow, her hair black as the night sky, her eyes filled with both sorrow and strength. When he woke, Ayanna was already stirring. She sat near the window, staring out at the rising dawn. "The snow's stopped," she said quietly. Her voice carried the weight of gratitude and uncertainty all at once. "You should eat," Thomas replied, sliding a plate of cornbread and dried meat toward her. She hesitated, as though afraid to take too much, then accepted. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "Because no one else would have," he said simply. The answer seemed to surprise her. "You don't even know me." He shrugged slightly. "Don't have to." She smiled faintly for the first time, and that small curve of her lips made the room feel brighter. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was healing, the kind that lets wounds close slowly without words. By afternoon, Ayanna found the strength to stand. Thomas watched her as she walked to the door, pushing it open just enough to feel the cold breeze. The land stretched out before her, wild, unforgiving, beautiful. "It's different here," she murmured. "So quiet," Thomas nodded. "That's why I stayed." He told her how he'd come to Montana years ago, chasing nothing but open sky after losing everything he loved. She listened without judgment, her eyes soft, understanding the ache beneath his calm. In her silence, he found comfort, and in his steadiness she found safety. As night fell again, Thomas built another fire. Ayanna sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "They'll come looking for me," she said finally. Thomas didn't flinch. "Then they'll find me waiting." His tone was even, steady, but it carried a promise, one forged in the kind of strength that doesn't need to be loud. She looked at him, seeing in his weathered face a man who knew loss but still chose kindness. "You'd risk yourself for me?" she whispered. He met her gaze. "I already have." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. That night the cabin felt alive with unspoken truths. Thomas sat close to the fire, mending an old saddle strap, while Ayanna hummed a soft melody under her breath, something ancient, haunting, and beautiful. The song seemed to blend with the crackle of the fire and the whistling wind outside, weaving a fragile thread between two souls who had both been broken by life. When the flames dimmed and the world turned still, she whispered a quiet, "Thank you." Thomas didn't answer with words, only nodded, tipping his hat slightly before the darkness carried them both into quiet rest. Outside, the snow glistened under the moonlight, untouched and pure. Inside, two lives, once lost to pain and loneliness, had found a fragile peace. Thomas didn't know what the coming days would bring, but for that night it didn't matter. He glanced at Ayanna sleeping by the fire, the faintest smile on her lips. In her, he saw not just someone he'd saved, but someone who might save him too. He turned his eyes to the window, where the stars burned bright over the Montana sky, whispering a silent promise to whatever power might be listening. She's safe now. I'll keep her safe. The Montana plains stretched endless beneath a crimson sunset, the wind sighing through tall grass like an old song. Rancher Thomas Reed guided his tired horse toward home after a long day fencing the north pasture. The world was quiet until he saw a figure stumble near his corral. His heart tightened. As he drew closer, he realized it was a young native woman, barefoot, bruised and trembling. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled with dust. She collapsed before she could speak, her breath shallow. Thomas jumped from his horse, caught her in his arms, and wrapped her in his wool coat. "You're safe now," he whispered, brushing hair from her face. She flinched at his touch, eyes wild with fear, but didn't pull away. "It's all right," he said softly. "Ain't no one here gonna hurt you?" She looked at him, uncertainty flickering between gratitude and mistrust. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Her lips trembled before she spoke. "Ayanna." The name lingered in the cold air like a prayer. Thomas nodded. "All right, Ayanna. Let's get you warm." He lifted her easily, feeling how frail she was beneath his coat, and carried her toward his small cabin at the edge of the valley. Inside, the fire crackled to life as Thomas laid her down near the hearth. He filled a tin cup from the kettle and offered it. "Drink slow," he said. She obeyed, her hands trembling as she sipped. The heat brought faint color back to her cheeks. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice raspy. "You're welcome," Thomas said simply. Outside, snow began to fall in lazy spirals, the first real storm of the season. He glanced out the window. No footprints followed hers. Whoever she was running from, she'd come alone. That thought brought both relief and unease. When she finally found her voice again, it came out quiet and raw. "They wanted to marry me to a man I don't love," she said, staring into the fire. "A man older than my father. I said no. My own kin turned on me." Thomas said nothing, letting the crackle of burning wood fill the silence. He'd learned long ago that some pain didn't need answers, only space to breathe. "You ran far," he said at last. "Farther than most would dare." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "I would rather die in the snow than live in his house." Thomas looked down, the words striking something deep within him. He'd buried his wife years ago, lost her to fever before their second spring. Since then, the house had been quiet, his days filled only with work and the dull rhythm of survival. Seeing Ayanna there, fragile but fierce, reminded him of the kind of courage he'd forgotten existed. He set another log on the fire. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "I'll take you wherever you need to go when morning comes." Ayanna hesitated, then nodded. "You're kind," she whispered. "No," Thomas replied. "Just human." Hours passed before the storm began to ease. Ayanna drifted into uneasy sleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Thomas sat near the window, rifle resting against his knee. He watched the darkness beyond the glass, listening to the wind whip across the frozen plains. He didn't know what danger might come, tribesmen, bounty hunters, or something worse, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't let anyone take her by force. The thought surprised him. He'd always minded his own business, never inviting trouble. Yet here he was, ready to face it if it meant keeping her safe. When dawn crept over the horizon, the world outside was white and still. The storm had passed, leaving silence behind. Ayanna stirred, blinking in the golden light that filtered through the window. Thomas poured her a small cup of coffee, weak but warm. She took it with shaking hands. "You should eat something," he said, handing her a slice of bread and smoked meat. "You've been through hell." She looked at him, eyes soft with gratitude. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. Thomas met her gaze. "Don't need to. You were in trouble. That's enough." For a long moment they sat without speaking. Outside, the snow began to melt under the rising sun, revealing patches of brown earth beneath. Ayana's shoulders relaxed slightly, her guard lowering. "I used to dream of freedom," she said suddenly. "Running across the plains, the wind in my hair. But dreams don't belong to women like me." Thomas set down his cup. "Maybe it's time that changed," he said. "Maybe it starts with one person choosing differently." She studied his face, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. "You think choice is that easy?" "No," he said, "but it's worth fighting for." The day passed quietly. Thomas showed her how to feed the horses, and she watched him work with quiet curiosity. When she smiled just once, it caught him off guard. He realized he hadn't seen a real smile in years, not one born of gratitude and peace. That evening, they shared stew by the fire, the air between them easy. "You've got a kind heart," Ayana said softly. Thomas shook his head. "No, just a lonely one." She smiled again, this time a little braver. "Maybe both," she said. Outside, the snow glowed under moonlight, the land vast and silent once more. Later that night, when Thomas went to check the corral, he paused, looking back at the cabin. Inside, through the small window, he saw Ayana sitting near the fire, her face lit by soft amber light. For a moment he just stood there, watching her hum quietly to herself, a melody so gentle it felt like forgiveness. Something stirred deep inside him, something he hadn't felt since before grief had hardened his heart. When he returned, she was asleep again, her hand resting over his coat folded near her. Thomas took off his hat, bowed his head and whispered, "Rest easy now, girl." The fire burned low as the stars came out over the Montana plains. The world outside was still and endless, but inside that small wooden cabin, two broken lives had found the faintest spark of healing. Thomas sat in the flickering light until dawn, painted the sky pale blue. Then he rose quietly, watching Ayana breathe peacefully beside the fire. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if her people would come searching, but one truth had taken root deep in his chest. He couldn't let her face it alone. For the first time in years, he prayed, not for himself, but for her.